He is impelled constantly to make other and new equations, which form the basis of his interest in the new objects and of symbolism. Thus, not only does symbolism come to be the foundation of all fantasy and sublimation, but more than that, upon it is built up the subject's relation to the outside world and to reality in general. I pointed out that the object of sadism at its zenith, and of the epistemophilic impulse arising simultaneously with sadism, is the mother's body with its fantasied contents. The sadistic fantasies directed against the inside of her body constitute the first and basic relation to the outside world and to reality. Upon the degree of success with which the subject passes through this phase will depend the extent to which he can subsequently acquire an external world corresponding to reality. We see then that the child's earliest reality is wholly fantastic. He is surrounded with objects of anxiety, and in this respect excrement, organs, objects, things animate and inanimate are, to begin with, equivalent to one another. As the ego develops, a true relation to reality is gradually established out of this unreal reality. Thus, the development of the ego and the relation to reality depend on the degree of the ego's capacity at a very early period to tolerate the pressure of the earliest anxiety situations. And, as usual, it is a question of certain optimum balance of the factors concerned. A sufficient quantity of anxiety is the necessary basis for an abundance of symbol formation and of fantasy. An adequate capacity of the part of the ego to tolerate anxiety is essential if anxiety is to be satisfactorily worked over, if this basic phase is to have a favorable issue, and if the development of the ego is to be successful. I have arrived at these conclusions from my general analytical experience, but they are confirmed in a remarkably striking way by a case in which there was an unusual inhibition of ego development. This case, of which I will now give some details, is that of a 4-year-old boy who, as regards the poverty of his vocabulary and of his intellectual attainments, was on the level of a child of about 15 or 18 months. Adaptation to reality and emotional relations to his environment were almost entirely lacking. This child, Dick, was largely devoid of affects, and he was indifferent to the presence or absence of mother or nurse. From the very beginning, he had only rarely displayed anxiety, and that in an abnormally small degree, with the exception of one particular interest, to which I will return presently. He had almost no interests, did not play, and had no contact with his environment. For the most part, he simply strung sounds together in a